In today's episode, I'll talk about two interesting stories. In the first one of the day, I'll talk about why India's factory dreams are actually falling short right now because there is nowhere for workers to live. And in the second story of the day, I'll talk about how Blinkit's 10-minute deliveries actually work and why it is now changing the way it stocks its products. Welcome to the Daily Brief Show by Zerodha, where our aim is to cut through the noise and simplify the biggest news and stories in the financial markets in a way that is easy for all of us to understand, yet one level deeper as compared to your traditional news channels. I am your host Anurag Bansal, and today is Friday, the 18th of July. See, something really big is happening in India's manufacturing story. This is something that does not really get talked about as much as it ideally should. See, last week we had covered on this show how the electronics giant Foxconn has managed to set up shop in India with all the support that it could ask for. Now, the company was given land, they got help in navigating regulations, and they also benefited from geopolitical tailwinds. But one very key piece of the story usually goes unnoticed. It's actually the people who actually work in these factories. See, when thousands of workers migrate to a new place to take up jobs, the question is, where are they supposed to live? See, in Foxconn's case, the company had to build housing from scratch. They spent more than 230 million US dollars to set up massive dormitories in Sri Perumbudur, Tamil Nadu, to accommodate nearly 18,000 workers. Now, that is just one company, mind you. It is just one factory as well. But the thing is, if India really wants to scale up its Make in India dream and become a global manufacturing hub, we will need many more such worker housing projects across all of our industrial clusters. Because without proper housing, factories will not really get the workforce they require, and the entire industrial strategy, so to say, will start to wobble. And the idea, mind you, is not even new. Across history, countries that have built world-class manufacturing ecosystems have also made sure that their workers have had a place to live in. Take Bournville in the UK for an instance. In case you're wondering, this is not just a name that is put on a chocolate bar. It is actually a village built by the Cadbury family for their factory workers. Bata did the exact same thing, where they built an entire town around their shoe factories, including one in West Bengal called Bata Nagar. But the model really took off in East Asia. In Taiwan and China, the state worked alongside private companies to build housing which was specifically meant for factory workers. Foxconn was a very big part of this story as well. When they set up manufacturing in China, they very well knew that their workers were mostly young migrants who came from rural areas, and they of course required a place to stay. So they included housing as a part of the job offer that they offered. Foxconn and local governments worked together to create entire townships with dorms, restaurants, malls, and even hospitals for that matter. They were known for strict rules and cramped spaces, but they still formed the backbone of sorts for China's manufacturing miracle that happened after that. Now, if we talk about India, we have tried this model as well. Back in the post-independent years, when the government was building up its industrial muscle through public sector companies, towns like Bokaro and Rourkela were created practically from scratch. They were basically built around steel plants, and housing was a very, very big part of that very master plan. But again, once the private sector started taking over here, the approach also started to change very quickly. Private companies were not really encouraged, or they didn't even support building such townships. So the idea slowly started fading away, and it only survived in the PSU ecosystem. Now today, most Indian factory workers live in unauthorized or informal housing setups. These are usually set up by smaller landlords or labor contractors which are not professional developers. They are cramped, they have poor sanitation, and they also usually lacked basic services like clean water and reliable electricity. But again, they are still the best option that many workers have because they are just close to factory and cheap for them. Let's take Delhi's garment clusters as an example. In places like Okhla, workers usually live in shared rooms and they pay about 3,000 rupees a month, which, by the way, to give you a reference, is roughly around half of their salary. Each room might be shared by multiple people, and there is usually one bathroom for several rooms. The colonies are not regulated and they are far from being ideal at all. But they are available and they are nearby. That's all what matters to most workers who are just trying to make ends meet for themselves. Now you might wonder why there isn't anything better for them, right? The short answer is there is no money in it. See, informal landlords do not really have any incentive to improve the housing they provide. The workers cannot really afford to pay much more, more, and they usually treat their current living setup as temporary in nature. But the deeper issue actually lies in how housing is actually structured in India overall. See, India's real estate sector is incredibly fragmented if you think about it, and our cities simply do not have enough homes to match how fast our population is urbanizing. To give you some numbers, we have a shortage of more than 30 million homes in urban India, and low income workers are obviously the worst hit over here. Because the thing is, building proper worker housing requires coordination between governments, private companies, and also real estate developers. But that coordination honestly rarely exists. Now, the government did try to fix this to their credit. In 2020, they launched the Affordable Renting Housing Complex scheme to address this exact issue. Now, the idea here was to give migrant and low income workers a dorm style housing which is very close to factory and job sites. The scheme had two models. The first one involved converting existing vacant government housing into worker dormitories, and the other one allowed private or public entities to build new rental homes on their land and operate them for 25 years. But the problem was that the scheme failed to take off. Less than 7% of the homes that were meant to be converted under Model 1 were actually turned into ARHC units, and under Model 2, only around 35,000 beds were actually created across the entire country, and many of them, mind you, were not even near factories, so that defeats the entire purpose altogether. So therefore, while the intent was definitely there, the execution clearly fell short somewhere or the other. Now, the private sector has not been able to step in here either. In India, building housing, like I said, is extremely complex and also a very expensive affair. As per a report by KPMG, more than 80% of construction projects in our country face cost overruns, and nearly half of them are delayed. Now, that kind of risk does not make sense for low return projects like affordable housing. So therefore, developers naturally end up focusing on slightly premium housing instead, where profits are higher and financing is also much easier. Also, a part of the reason why it is so very difficult to build low cost housing in India also comes down to how land is actually categorized and regulated. See, land in India is usually divided into multiple zones. This could be residential, commercial, and also industrial. And each zone has its own set of rules, and that affects everything from what you can build to how much you will pay for things like water and electricity. Worker housing does not really fall into any of these categories. Some states treat it as residential, others call it commercial, and some do not even allow it on industrial plots at all. Now, in Noida, for example, you cannot build housing on industrial land. In Tamil Nadu, hostels for male workers are treated as commercial properties, while hostels for working women are exempted from it. And Karnataka, on the other hand, if you think about it, allows worker housing almost everywhere. So there is definitely no clarity, and all of this makes it very hard for people to plan projects at scale. These classifications also affect costs, obviously, because if your housing is on commercial land, you pay much higher rates for utilities than you pay on residential land. And that, of course, adds to the financial burden over time. And then there is also building codes that often make things much worse here. See, many states restrict how tall you can build through what is called the floor area ratio, or FAR. So basically, if you want to put more people in an apartment, you will need to buy more land, which again will significantly increase costs. Some states even demand parking spaces in worker housing, which just does not make sense for low-income workers who do not even own vehicles for most part of it. And all that said and done, even if somebody does manage to get through the regulatory mess here, they will still require financing. But again, banks and investors are very reluctant to put money into such projects. The returns are low, the risks are very high, and the rental yield in India is just 2.3%, which is among the worst in Asia. And that is why when it comes to housing, private developers simply decide to stay away. But anyway, that said, a few success stories still do very much exist. The Foxconn housing project is one of them. Another one is in Tirupur, Tamil Nadu, where the local government and private players have worked together to build a township for garment workers. Gujarat has also built a hostel near its Sanand industrial cluster using a very similar model. Now, these projects have worked because they were designed as partnerships between the government and private players. The rules were very clear, and there was some level of support to make the numbers work out in at least somebody's favor. Now, some companies have even used their CSR funds to build housing. The real estate group called Rustomjee in Mumbai, for example, used its CSR funds earlier this year to create 35,000 square foot housing blocks for its workers. So the thing is, it's not really that the problem cannot be solved. The only thing is that it just requires some thoughtful design, financial support, and some clear policies to make it viable. But again, most of these wins are outliers, like I said. They succeeded by bending rules that normally prevent housing projects from taking off. And if India wants to to truly industrialize, we cannot really rely on workarounds. We will require some real reforms. Now, at the end of the day, we keep saying that India's cheap labor is a very big advantage in manufacturing. But again, cheap labor alone is also not enough. If workers do not have clean, affordable places to stay near the factory, they simply will not even come there. And if they don't come, factories obviously will just not run. So the next time a very big manufacturing project will come to India, the real test will not just be whether we can offer land or incentive to global companies. The test will actually be whether workers stepping off a bus can actually find a decent room close to the factory floor. And if that becomes the norm, Make in India will finally have a real shot at success. But if not, we might actually end up with shiny new factories, but no one really to work inside them. On that note, let's move on and talk about the second story of the day. A few years ago, the entire idea of somebody coming and delivering groceries to your doorstep in just 10 minutes would have sounded ridiculous, right? But today it's just normal for you and me. It's expected. But there is actually an interesting shift happening in this space once again, and this time about how companies like Blinkit actually manage their operations behind the scenes. See, Blinkit is now changing the way it works. Starting September this year, they are moving to something that's called an inventory-led model. Now, if you're wondering what that means, you're not alone, trust me. To make sense of this move, we will all have to understand how quick commerce works in the first place, which is basically how apps like Blinkit, Zepto, Instamart, etc. manage to get even a nail cutter and a packet of tomatoes to your home in under 10 minutes. Because what looks like magic on the surface is actually a very, very complicated dance of logistics, data, and decisions that are mostly invisible to all of us. So let's start from the very beginning and understand this very slowly and nicely. See, when quick commerce first appeared in India, people did not know what to make of it. The biggest question people were asking that time was, who really requires groceries in 10 minutes? But again, the hesitation did not last too long. Today, millions and millions of people use these apps regularly, and it is quite hard to imagine life without them at this point. According to recent estimates, the total value of goods that are sold through quick commerce platforms in India has shot up to around 64,000 crore rupees in 2025. That is a huge number, especially for a business model that has struggled to grow in many other places across the world. So the question obviously is, what has worked so well in India? Yes, of course, India's relatively low labor costs do help. They make it cheaper for us to run such an operation, but of course, that alone cannot explain how quickly people have adopted it, right? It turns out that the real reason actually lies in the way we shop in our country. See, to give you a sense, in countries like the US, people tend to buy groceries in bulk. You could think about large supermarket trips that last you for multiple weeks or even multiple months in some cases. But again, in India, most people shop a lot more frequently and also in smaller quantities. If you realize you've run out of milk or onions for that matter, you will just pick it up the same day, maybe the same hour from your local kirana store, and now of course quick commerce. So this habit of buying just what we need when we need it fits beautifully with the quick commerce model. And once people got used to it for basics like bread, milk, vegetables, etc., these platforms started expanding their product ranges as well. And as a result, today you can order everything, right from a packet of chips to a full-size air conditioner from quick commerce in under 10 minutes. But again, the question then becomes, how exactly does all of this work so very quickly? See, the very core engine of a quick commerce platform is something that's called a dark store. I'm sure, of course, a lot of you watching this or listening to this are very familiar with the dark store at this point. These are basically small warehouses which are hidden away inside or near residential areas. They're not shops that you can walk into, mind you. They're actually built entirely to pack and dispatch online orders. Each dark store usually covers an area of about 2,500 to 4,000 square feet, and it caters to customers within roughly about a 1.5 to 2 kilometer radius. That is what keeps delivery distances and also times very, very short for this model. Now, to make things extremely clear for us here, let's take the example of an order somebody would place and how it actually works to reach to them. See, the moment you place an order on a quick commerce app, that order shows up on a device that is carried by a worker called a picker. The device also shows them the map and tells them the fastest path through the warehouse to collect the exact items that you have ordered. The store is designed for speed in every format. They have narrow aisles and a smart layout that puts the most commonly ordered items, let's say for example milk and bread, right near the packing areas. Now these pickers usually complete the collection of your order in just about 60 to 90 seconds. And once the items are picked, they are sent to a packing table where somebody very quickly seals them in a bag and keeps it ready in a staging zone. Now at this point, a delivery rider who has already been assigned to your order, who is either waiting nearby or is arriving just a few minutes later, picks it up and rushes out. The whole operation, from the moment you press the order button to when the rider heads out, typically wraps up in under 3 to 4 minutes or maximum 5 minutes in some cases. That is how 10-minute promises are made possible. So now that we understand this entire model, the next obvious question becomes, how do these dark stores ensure that they always have the right things available with them? See, the products inside these stores come from much larger warehouses, which are called mother warehouses. These warehouses supply stock to all the dark stores in a particular region. And restocking, mind you, is not just a once a week affair. It actually happens 2 to 3 times every single day. These replenishment schedules are based on real-time data, and these apps constantly monitor what is being ordered, which items are running low, and what needs to be sent next. Now, some of these systems are even set to automatically alert warehouse managers when a product is about to get over. Also, the choice of what to keep in each of these dark stores is not random either. It is based on some detailed data analysis, which includes what people in that neighborhood tend to buy, how often they tend to buy it, what sells fast, what has higher margins, what is seasonal, and so on and so forth. Common items like dairy, snacks, fruits, and basic household items usually form the core of this inventory. But over time, companies have started stocking high margin items as well, like grooming products or packaged foods, so that they can improve the profitability of every single order that they have. Now, that's pretty much about how quick commerce works and all the context that all of us need to understand. Now, let's move on to the latest news about Blinkit. See, until now, most quick commerce platforms have followed what is called a marketplace model. That means they do not really own the inventory in their dark stores. Third-party vendors owned it. Blinkit and others just acted as intermediary platforms in some sense. They connected users to these dark stores, they managed the technology, they provided logistics, and they took a cut from every single order. And the vendors who operated these dark stores were responsible for what to stock, how to run it, and even how to manage supply. But Blinkit has now decided to flip this entire model. Starting September, like I said, it will move to an inventory-led structure. This basically means that Blinkit itself will own and control the inventory stored in the dark stores. And because of this, they will make decisions on what to buy, how much to stock, and how to distribute it. Now, I know a lot of you might think that this could be a huge cost burden, so why would Blinkit really do it? Because after all, owning inventory basically means putting down your own money up front. And in business terms, this is called tying up working capital, which is money that is locked until those goods are actually sold. But Blinkit, in its fourth quarter of FY 2025 letter to shareholders, said something that was very interesting and very surprising. They said that the total capital that they expect to spend on inventory this year is less than 1,000 crore rupees. That, to give you a sense, is actually much lower than what most people would have guessed. Now, you might be asking, why is that the case? See, that is because quick commerce does not really function like traditional retail. In regular shops, item might sit on shelves for days or weeks before being bought by somebody. That means the cash that is used to buy them stays stuck here. But in quick commerce, items actually move pretty quickly in comparison. Inventory turns over quickly, products come in and go out within hours, and this rapid movement reduces the amount of cash that you need at one single point in time. Also, owning inventory gives Blinkit and other players for that matter a lot more control. They can now negotiate directly with large suppliers and FMCG brands, they can buy in bulk, and they can possibly also get much better prices and therefore better margins. They can also reduce out of stock situations and control the quality of what is delivered and take it all in their own hands. So basically, when everything, right from what to buy to how to deliver it, is very tightly managed by one single company, there is also a much higher chance of improving margins and making operations a lot more profitable. So if I were to sum it all up, Blinkit's move from a marketplace model to an inventory-led model may sound like a small operational tweak when you read it in the news, but it could actually have far-reaching effects here. It could change how it works with suppliers, how it controls product availability, and how efficiently it can deliver items to people like you and me. In fact, it could even change how the economics of quick commerce evolves in the long run. That brings me to the end of the two stories of the day. On that note, let's move on to the final section and talk about the quick news headlines. First, in one of our earlier episodes, we had flagged the building pressure of India's IT sector due to Trump's tariff plans and tightening client budgets. Now that pressure seems to be translating into pain, and the cracks are no longer limited to clients or contracts. TCS is facing heat from inside the house. A top IT workers group has written to the Labour Ministry accusing the company of coercive practices under its new bench policy. Employees without projects for more than 35 days in a year reportedly risk career stagnation resignation, or even worse, termination in some cases. The union claims the policy fosters a culture of fear, especially for workers stuck in allocation limbo due to shifting business priorities. Second, gold is something that our country, and of course the rest of the world as well, cannot really escape from. We have covered the relentless rise of gold prices before on our episodes. And now, India's markets regulator SEBI has proposed requiring asset managers to use domestic spot prices for valuing gold and silver mutual funds and ETFs. This move aims to enhance transparency and standardize valuation practices, especially as gold ETFs saw a tenfold surge in inflows last month amidst global economic uncertainties. Third, we've explored how India's leading hotel chains are placing long-term bets. ITC Hotels has just checked in with numbers that reinforce the same story. The newly demerged hospitality arm of ITC reported a 54% year-over-year surge in net profit in the first quarter of FY 2026, touching nearly 133 crore rupees. Revenue rose 15% to 815 crore rupees, even as May's geopolitical jitters, which hurt other hotel chains, briefly disrupted business. ITC Hotels has now crossed the 200 property mark as well, with 13,400 plus keys and a very strong presence in both metro and spiritual destinations. Fourth and the final one for the day, Cinepolis India is targeting double-digit revenue growth in 2025 by expanding its screen count and capitalizing on a strong lineup of Hollywood and Bollywood blockbusters. The company plans to add 20 to 25 new screens to its existing 485 screens and is aiming to boost admissions that are currently 20% below pre-COVID levels. That's all the news and stories I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. This is your host Anurag Bansal signing off. Take care and I'll see you later. Bye-bye. Disclaimer: this content is for informational purposes only. None of the stocks, brands, or products mentioned are recommendations or endorsements.